as it did Morgan Stanley, ending investment banking on Wall Street. There is no more investment banking on Wall Street. They're all holding companies now. They're safer, quote unquote, for the Pope. Well, Goldman Sachs is the first one, controlled by Rome through the Knights of Malta. The second one, Morgan Stanley. We just mentioned Morgan Stanley. Again, on September 21st, the Federal Reserve allowed Morgan Stanley to change status from an investment bank to a bank holding company. And those were the last two banks, Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, as investment banks. There are no more investment banks in the country. On October 14th, which was what, a day or so ago, yesterday? Yeah. Mitsubishi of Japan bought 21% of Morgan Stanley. The Jesuits in control of Morgan Stanley having been born out of J.P. Morgan's bank, bonesmen are in it, they are now beginning to divest into communist China. Isn't that nice? We Americans that made Morgan Stanley all this money, we made it the bank that it became. Now it's giving our wealth to our enemies that have every intention of invading us in the future. The huge Chinese army that's being built is being built by American firms like Morgan Stanley. How do you like that, my white brother? As the Vatican is going to cut our throats using Chinese murderers when they arrive on our shores. Just remember, when they get here, you paid for it. Just remember, when they get here, you kept filing your 1040s when you didn't know it because you were not in the public sector. If you're like me, you were working with your hands, bloodying up your hands every day, trying to hatch out a living, doing a job for somebody, and they paid you after you were finished. You weren't working for the federal government. The Internal Revenue Code doesn't apply to you. Go to losthorizons.com. Get Cracking the Code by Hendrickson. Learn his work. And you're paying for your destruction, my white brethren, if you keep paying and you allow this to happen on Wall Street, that Mitsubishi, these Japanese, who hate Americans, who still blame us for Hiroshima and Nagasaki when they were ground bursts, assembled by the Jesuits on the ground in Japan and then detonated with the aid of the Japanese High Command so we could be blamed for it, while Curtis LeMay's B-29s flew overhead and dropped the magnesium flash bombs laced with uranium and plutonium, while the Jesuits were on the ground flipping the switch and were shielded underneath the devices, and then when they emerged unscathed, why, they attributed their survival to a miracle of the Virgin Mary. And the Japanese people can't wait to invade us and get even for Hiroshima and Nagasaki because they offered terms of surrender that were fair, and the Jesuits in control of the U.S. government said no way, because they had to create their airborne nuclear war hoax. Well, Mitsubishi is getting our wealth. And the capital, and in 2007 there was a capital infusion from China of $5 billion, so that by 2010 China would own 10% of Morgan Stanley shares. So the Japanese will control 21%, the Chinese will control 10%. I would say that they have controlling interests nearly in Morgan Stanley. And who were the traders at Morgan Stanley who did this? Well, one of them is John T. Mack. John T. Mack, this Irishman, this white Gentile, actually he's a Greek Orthodox. He's chairman and CEO. So, Morgan Stanley is run by a white Gentile, not a Jew. And a white Gentile that is beholden and subservient to the Pope of Rome. John T. Mack was protected. He was shielded from questioning. When the SEC investigators interviewed Mack on August 1st, 2006. So he's protected. Mack is untouchable. He won't be tried for treason. He's untouchable. He's an insider trader. And that insider trading, that evil dishonesty was carried over in selling off our assets to China and Japan. Are you getting mad yet? Are you white men getting angry yet at what's being done to you and your families and your wives and your children? Look at your little boys. Look at your little girls. And ask yourself, do they have a future here? And if the answer is no, we have to do something about it. Or just go down and buy some manacles at the hardware store and put the chains on our children's ankles and tell them to get used to it. It's time, men of God who know the Lord, to be angry, to have righteous anger over what's been done to us by these savages on Wall Street. Number 4, Bank of America. Bank of America. Well, Bank of America was started by the Jesuits out of San Francisco by a papal knight named Gianni. But let's take a look in the Vatican Billions by Admiral Manhattan and see what he has to say about the Bank of America. Well, he writes on page 184, quote, "Even more telling is the fact that 50 years ago they, the Jesuits, furnished A.P. Gianni, Giannini, an Italian promoter, with half of the starting capital for the Bank of America. Today, the Jesuits still own 51% of the stock," unquote. Now, this was in San Francisco. I was raised near San Francisco. And this was on North Beach. Well, North Beach is where they have all the strippers. And when I was unsaved and in high school, my buddies and I used to go over to North Beach and try to sneak in and watch the strippers. Well, it's all run by the Vatican. That's where the Bank of America originated, on North Beach. And Chiniquy says in his book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, that the Jesuits were in control of San Francisco since no later than 1850. And since Wells Fargo, which we will be examining a little later, that originates in San Francisco, the Jesuits run Wells Fargo too. And with the merger of Wells Fargo and Wachovia, now it's another super bank, and we're going to see that then the Bank of America and Wells Fargo are going to be working together. Oh, what a deadly web we weave when we practice to deceive. What a banking system we are creating from which no one will be able to escape. And our IRS will have so much wonderful absolute power in auditing people because they will all have to go. They will have to go into these huge systems, and they don't have to go through all these multitudinous banks that people have their money in. It'll only be a few banks. Are you getting angry yet? Are you being bothered yet, my white brethren in Christ? We'll go on. Admiral Manhattan. He says here on page 191. Well, I'll go to 190. The tiara, however, far from reaching the poor of the world, somehow ended up as a private possession of the ablest ecclesiastical financial wizard of America, Cardinal Spellman. Cardinal Spellman was trained by Jesuits. Cardinal Spellman had a special room over here at Jesuit of Isaac Jacques, here in Warnersville, Pennsylvania, room number 3. He was the abject tool of the Jesuit order, and that's what made him a financial wizard. It's because the Jesuits are the financial wizards. On page 191 we read, the two extremes appear to be the Jesuits and their opposites, the Palatines. The pugnacious Jesuits, about 8,000 in the U.S. alone, out of 35,000 in the order, by 1983-84, had increased their income to between $300 to $350 million, and were the controllers, even if tangentially, of the biggest bank in the world, the Bank of America, unquote.